Hello and welcome to the editorial analysis of The Hindu. Today we shall be discussing the editorial of the 2nd of May. So coming to the first article, Powershift. This article is context with regards to the recent Madras High Court verdict about the power sharing between the Lieutenant Governor as well as the Chief Minister of Puducherry. This is an important matter, important topic for General Studies paper 2. So this is one thing that you should keep in mind. Now coming to the issues which have been discussed, the first issue that you need to know about is that this particular debate or this particular tussle between the Lieutenant Governor as well as the Chief Minister in Puducherry is what has been prolonged, or it is a prolonged dispute on trivial matters like, for instance, the Lieutenant Governor, who is Mrs. Kiran Bedi, and the Chief Minister V. Narayanasamy. Now what had happened was that once the Lieutenant Governor had passed a law of that all the people who were not wearing helmets were to be fined. So the government in this regard said that who is the Lieutenant Governor to pass this law? The government had other plans that wanted to first create awareness and sensitization to people rather than simply imposing a fine on the people for not wearing a helmet. So these kind of trivial issues have also invited a tussle between these two authorities in Puducherry. So this is one dispute that is going on for a very, very long time. More so after Mrs. Kiran Bedi took over the post of Lieutenant Governor, the tussle is what has further widened. Next is the issue of democratic principles. Now here you need to know that the constitution scheme is what is about democracy and it is about republicanism. So in such a scheme, any government that has been elected by the people is what is supreme, and as a result of which even the Madras High Court has upheld these democratic principles and the constitution scheme, and the verdict that the Madras High Court has given is what is in the favor of the Chief Minister or the elected government of Puducherry, and the verdict is what has said that the Lieutenant Governor cannot override the decisions, or the Lieutenant Governor is bound to act on the aid and advice of the elected government, and this is what is in line with the democratic principles. Also what you need to know here is with regards to the Supreme Court verdict on Delhi. Now a similar tussle is what continuously goes on between the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi as well as the Chief Minister of Delhi is what we have continuously been seeing. So the Supreme Court in this context had given a verdict, and this was what was a verdict given by a 5-judge constitutional bench. So this was a major judgment. And in this particular judgment, the Supreme Court had noted that the Lieutenant Governor first has to act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. And if there is what is a difference of opinion, then the Lieutenant Governor can definitely refer the matter to the President, but only if there is a difference of opinion. And not every single matter is what is to be referred to the President by the Lieutenant Governor. And the Lieutenant Governor was not to have any independent decision-making power, which means that either the decision is going to be of the Council of Ministers or the decision will be of the President. But the Lieutenant Governor will have no power, and this is what was the verdict of the Supreme Court. And taking clue from this particular verdict, this verdict by the High Court of Madras is what has been given. So this is a landmark judgment. This is important judgment. Another thing that is very, very important, which has been discussed in the editorial, is the difference between the Union Territory of Delhi, that is the National Capital Territory Delhi, as well as the Union Territory of Puducherry. Now here you should know that the Puducherry legislature is what has been created as a parliamentary law. That means it is not constitutional, it is only a law that has been made by the parliament based on an enabling provisions of the constitution under Article 239A. So this is one thing that you should know about the Puducherry legislature. On the contrary, the legislature in the National Capital Territory, that is Delhi, has been created in the constitution itself. A constitutional amendment was what took place, and under Article 239AA, this is the article that discusses about the creation of the legislature of Delhi. So indeed the powers of this particular legislature, or the relevance of the legislature of Delhi, is somewhat higher than that of Puducherry's legislature, because this is what is not made by a constitutional law but only by a parliamentary law. This is one aspect. Another difference is that Delhi being the national capital also, powers like public order, police as well as land are what are not given to the state government, but that is not the case in Puducherry, in which case the legislature does enjoy power over public order, police as well as land. So these are some differences between Delhi and Puducherry. If in case you have a question where you have to compare these two regions, then also you should be prepared with the differences. Otherwise, if a combined question is what comes, then in that case you will have to discuss about the Supreme Court verdict The examples of Delhi as well as of Puducherry and the tussle that is going on between Lieutenant Governor as well as the Chief Minister. So that is how you have to discuss this particular editorial. The relevance, as I've told you, is for General Studies paper 2. Now coming to the next article, the cost of resistance. Now the context here is with regards to a report. Now this is the IACG report, which stands for the Intra-Agency Coordination Group report. This is a report that has come on antimicrobial resistance. Now first and foremost, you need to understand here that this is what is a major health crisis. Globally, this is a major health crisis. Now what happens in antimicrobial resistance is that antibacterial medicines or antibiotics are some medicines or some drugs that individuals take whenever they are infected by some bacterial infection. Now it might happen that once this drug is taken against a bacteria, the bacteria will die and the person will become free of that particular infection. But in some cases what happens is that the bacteria might have a tendency to form a resistance to this particular drug, and this might continue. In such a scenario, a drug too is what has to be taken so that this bacteria is what can be killed. So this is one process, this is one chain that goes on, that some bacteria have a tendency to develop a type of a resistance against a particular drug. So in such a scenario, what happens is that multiple drugs are what are required. But what is happening now is that because so many drugs are what are being consumed by people, that a situation has arisen where majority of the bacteria are resistant to majority of the drugs, and this is what is resulting in a problem of antimicrobial resistance. And this is something that is important as a major health crisis that is emerging globally. Another issue is that of the economic impact, and this is what this report has highlighted. Now basically the report says that this issue or this problem will result in economic shocks similar to the financial crisis that took place in the year 2008 and 9. So this is going to be a major concern globally. Also 10 million people are expected to lose their lives annually by the year 2050 because of the resistance that bacteria will develop to antibiotics. So that is another cause of concern. The healthcare cost as well as the food production cost is what is going to rise. Also, there will be an annual loss of 3.8% of the annual GDP of the world by 2050 is what has been talked about in this report. Also, it is being discussed that 24 million people might be pushed into poverty primarily because of the rising health cost as well as the rising cost of food. So these are some issues that have been raised in this particular report. So the report becomes important. Also, what has been discussed in the editorial, something very, very important, is the concept of price of prevention. Now, if prevention from this is what is to be done, then approximately $2 is what has to be spent per head per year by every single government. And for mediocre countries, or for that matter, mediately rich countries, for those countries, this is still affordable. And even for the poorer countries, this is not a very high amount of sum. But if this catastrophe of antimicrobial resistance is what develops, if this apocalypse is what does happen, then the cost of prevention is going to be very, very high is what has been discussed. So it is better that the governments pay attention to this and go ahead with paying this price for preventing this kind of resistance from developing. Also, what has been discussed here is that a plan is what is required, especially in the case of India. But the plan for doing away with antimicrobial resistance is what was formed 9 years ago in India itself. But the challenge, like every other scheme or plan in India, is that of implementation, that there has been a poor implementation of this particular plan. This next issue is that of a twin challenge. Now the editorial discusses that there is a twin challenge of both overuse as well as underuse of antibiotics. Now what happens is that there are still cases where people are dying of simple diseases like pneumonia, which could easily be treated by an antibiotic treatment. But because there is no availability of antibiotics to the poor, they are dying of these easily treatable diseases also. But on the contrary, the rich who can pay are overusing antibiotics, and this overuse of antibiotics is what is resulting in the antimicrobial resistance. So this is what has been highlighted here. Next is the issue of animal husbandry. Now the editorial here is discussing that in this sector of animal husbandry, several human-used antibiotics are what are being used for animal treatments. For example, quinolones are what are used for the treatment of several animals, and this is again resulting in antimicrobial resistance. Another issue that has been discussed is the need of a multi-stakeholder approach. Now the editorial is saying that for this issue to be resolved, to meet the challenge of antimicrobial resistance, multiple stakeholders have to come together. Primarily the private industries have to come, also the philanthropic groups have to come, then citizen activists have to come together so that they can collectively fight this particular challenge. The pharmaceutical industry, being the private groups, have to play a major role, because at present a curb on the counter sale of antibiotics is what is not there in many countries, including India. So this is what is indeed a needed or much needed requirement. Next is the issue of postponing resistance. Now, how is this possible to postpone antimicrobial resistance? For this, what is required is that improved hygiene is what is done, as well as vaccinations are what are done. This is a challenge for India, because in terms of hygiene, you already know that India is facing several challenges. There's a high degree of water contamination that is there. Also, vaccination in India is a major challenge. So this is something that indeed India has to focus upon. Also, what you should know in this particular context as a gist is that the long-term impacts of antimicrobial resistance is very, very high. For example, if one antibiotic is such that all the bacteria get resistant to this particular antibiotic, then in that case, this antibiotic will be of no use to humankind. So this is what is a loss for decades. For decades, this particular antibiotic will not be used. So this is what is going to be a major loss to the entire health sector, and this is what is going to result in a major health crisis. Now, this is a very, very important topic. Even if you are discussing the larger issue of health, there also you can discuss this particular topic. A separate question specific to antimicrobial resistance is what also you can expect. This is particularly important in the context of tuberculosis, where India is facing a major problem of multi-drug resistant bacteria. So in that context also, this article is important. So that's the relevance. Coming to the next article, standing up for Julian Assange. Now, this article is context with regards to the recent arrest of Julian Assange, who was the head of the WikiLeaks. Now, basically, I have discussed articles on this in the past also. So only few points are what are relevant for us, which we could extract or which we could use for our answers. The first point that has been discussed in the editorial is with regards to free speech as well as media freedom. Now, the editorial is discussing that if Julian Assange is going to be punished, then this is the death of free speech as well as media freedom, primarily because he was a champion of free speech as well as of media freedom. Also because several media houses with several journalists across the world have taken data from WikiLeaks. They have published it. So how is it that now we are putting all the blame on one person and not others? So that is one issue. The second issue that has been discussed here is with regards to the Rafale documents. Here the editorial is discussing that in India recently, the Attorney General K.K. Venugopal, he told the Supreme Court that the Rafale documents that were presented before the court by a newspaper, primarily even the Hindu was involved in this, are what have been stolen from the government, and in this context the government is planning to file charges against these media houses under the Official Secrets Act. Now the issue here was that these documents clearly represented that there was some fraud that was done, there was corruption that was done in the Rafale deal, but the issue that the government was not focusing on was that these documents were what was stolen, and it was targeting media houses rather than addressing the major issue of corruption that has taken place. So that is what the editorial is discussing, that this is one era, it is continuously being seen that this is the time where free speech and media freedom is what is being threatened. So in that context is where you can relate this particular matter of the arrest of Julian Assange. Another issue is that of the chilling effect on media that is going to be created. Now the editorial is saying that if Julian Assange is given a very stringent punishment, then in that case a chilling effect is what is going to happen on any whistleblower across the globe, which is not in the interest of freedom of speech. So that is the entire analysis of this editorial which is relevant for us. Some points from Julian Assange's case as well as an example of him is what you can use in UPSC answers. So that is how you have to use this particular article, and that's the relevance of this particular article. So that's about our discussion today. I thank you all for watching the video.